Welcome to the presentation on the tariffs. People are talking about them, so we said there is a good and bad in everything, so we thought I might as well explain what we know a bit. Hopefully it's useful. If you know better, sure, tell us. We'd love to know more and improve the presentations. Okay, so today we will be exploring trade tariffs, how they're calculated, what they mean for the economy, and especially how they impact the US economy and some of the other economies in both the short term and long term. A trade tariff is a tax placed on imports. It's often used to protect local businesses or to raise money for the government. There are two main types: ad valorem tariffs, which are based on the percentage of the value, and specific tariffs, which are fixed amounts per unit. Here is the basic formula. The tariff amount equals the tariff rate multiplied by the value of the import. So if a product is worth $1,000, it's taxed at 10%, the importer pays $100 in tariffs. Tariffs can be calculated in three ways. Ad valorem tariffs are percentage based, specific tariffs are flat fee per unit, and compound tariffs are a mix of both, charging a percentage plus a fixed fee per unit. Let's take a real example of a company that imports 100 smartphones at $300 each and with a tariff of 15%. So the total import value is $30,000, and we multiply that by 15%, so the importer has to pay $4,500 in tariffs. So far, tariffs have brought in billions or trillions of dollars in revenue for countries. However, the impact on consumers is mixed. Some prices go up while others remain stable, some might even go down. Usually they don't go down, but some cases they do. Companies are adjusting their supply chains to source from tariff-free countries. I'll explain more in that later. In the long run, tariffs are expected to promote domestic manufacturing and reduce reliance on foreign goods. This could help shrink the US trade deficit and increase job opportunities at home. Strategically, tariffs help protect industries critical to national security like technology and steel. They also give the US more leverage in trade talks, forcing trade partners to negotiate fairer deals. This is the main idea that I understand is behind these tariffs. Now we shall give you some examples of some of the labels and how they are used in the system. Here is an example of an apple juice. Due to the labeling standards, they have to have all these details. For example, it contains water, a little bit of apple juice, concentrate, and it says it's less than 0.5%. That's less than 1 in 200 is actually the apple juice concentrate. And then you got some chemicals for preservation, and it says the concentrate contains apple juice concentrate from USA and other countries, Argentina, Chile, China, and Turkey. Notice that it does not give the percentages of how much of the concentrate is from these different countries. Maybe in the future the labeling standards will become even more stronger, and then they will start saying you have to have the percentages, so you can actually have a much better idea of what percentage is what you're getting. Here is an example from Australia. You have the logo, you have the bar chart, and the bar chart explains made in Australia from at least 60% Australian ingredients. So like in the previous one, here it said you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 different countries, but you don't know how much of the concentrate is from the USA. So here in Australia, you get to know like it's 60% Australian, 40% other countries. For example, another example is, for example, from cattle born in Mexico, raised and slaughtered in the US. Now, how long it has been raised? I mean, it was like imported 1 month before slaughter. That is not really clear from this label. Bananas grown in Colombia. Okay. And then, well, anyway, that's a banana, so nothing much has been done to it, so that's pretty good. Grown in Colombia, you know, it's 100% Colombian. The result of this is that if your labeling is good and you don't allow a mixture easily and you control it, what will happen is you will have a higher ranking in terms of being respected by the maiden labels. I mean, people will trust you based on how many kinds of things you allow to be labeled by your country. So, for example, maybe Germany is very strict in that. So, if something is said to be made in Germany, people sort of trust it a lot more than compared to other countries. And maybe to get to these levels, you have to be very careful of which other countries take their products and send it to your country and then relabel them as made in your country. Now we come to the current thing that people are talking about, which is the Trump administration tariffs. They have a formula for calculating this whole list of percentages. In the formula, they've got variables like elasticity of demand, elasticity of supply, government revenue, domestic industry response, consumer welfare. Beyond the basic formula, the US administration often uses more complex economic models to assess the tariff impact. These models involve these items which I've mentioned. The alpha, which is the elasticity of demand, represents how sensitive demand is to price changes. Beta, which is elasticity of supply, reflects the supply side elasticity. That means how sensitive the demand is to the supply. Gamma, this one, government revenue impact, estimates the government revenue generated from the tariffs. Delta is the domestic industry response, and it measures how domestic industries respond to this kind of tariff. Epsilon, the consumer welfare change, captures the effect on consumer welfare, basically whether consumers are better off or worse based on this policy. These help policy makers predict both short-term and long-term effects before they implement these tariffs. Okay, so this slide shows the more advanced formula used by some administrators for policy modeling. Alpha represents the tariff rate. Beta is the value of the imports. Gamma is the number of units imported. Delta accounts for the expected increase in domestic production due to the tariff. Epsilon is the elasticity of demand, which captures how much consumer behavior is expected to change in response to the price increases. So this formula calculates the expected revenue and economic impact, adjusting for real-world behavior. Let's look at how different countries approach tariffs. Singapore has a tendency to keep the tariffs very low or near zero to encourage global trade. It's a hub for import and export and re-export. The UAE is similar but has a standard 5% tariff for any stuff coming into the country, unless you're bringing it into the free zone where it is 0%. And some essential items or locally used items are exempted from this 5% tax. For example, food, medicine, or local manufacturing inputs. Qatar follows the GCC rule similar to the 5%, but increases tariffs on harmful goods like alcohol. Mexico adjusts tariffs based on its many trade agreements. US goods enter tariff-free thanks to USMCA and NAFTA. China, on the other hand, strategically uses tariffs to protect key industries like tech and manufacturing. China, on the other hand, strategically uses tariffs to protect key industries like tech and farming. Singapore has a strong trade relation with the US and has minimal tariffs, so the formula had a low impact on Singapore, and the alpha was near zero. The UAE saw minor tariffs and low elasticity of demand, so the formula didn't produce any significant difference in the tariff revenue. Qatar's trade with the US is small, meaning the gamma factor quantity is low, so even with a tariff rate which might be a bit higher, the total revenue is quite minimal. Mexico, which is a big part of the Trump strategy, which he threatened with 25% tariffs on cars. This means the alpha was high, the gamma was high, but the elasticity was also moderate, so there would be some consumer backlash. Not a great amount. With China, the full formula was in play. A 25% on tariff on over $250 billion worth of goods, very high beta, very high gamma. The US assumed the 25% increase in local production, delta, and some loss in demand, epsilon 0.3. The goal was to force supply chains to shift and shrink the trade deficit, as Trump keeps saying, China, China, China. And that was the main idea behind this formula. In the long run, tariffs are a way for the US to reshape its economy strategically. First, by making imported goods more expensive, tariffs push companies to consider manufacturing in the US, creating more American jobs. They're expecting 5 million jobs or something like that. Second, they reduce the dependency on foreign suppliers, which is especially important in times of global crises or conflicts. Third, tariffs can protect key industries like steel, aluminum, and semiconductors so they remain strong and competitive and alive. Fourth, tariffs give the US more bargaining power. When other countries know they can use tariffs effectively, they're more willing to negotiate fair trade deals. And finally, over time, tariffs can help bring down the trade deficit by balancing imports and exports. To wrap up, trade tariffs are easy to calculate but powerful in impact. When applied thoughtfully, they can protect key industries, create jobs, and even help rebalance global trade dynamics in the US's favor. Thank you for taking your precious time to see our presentation. If you found it useful, we would appreciate some feedback. If you find something can be improved, that would be helpful also.